Hey everyone, welcome to Character Design for Production. This is Class 1. Thank you all for coming to the class. We are going to be covering a wide range of topics in this course, which basically takes a character design from beginning to the end of the sort of usual production design process with one character. We will be adding a couple of characters along the way. But the main thing to think about is I'm really going to ask you guys to slow down and trust the process. And the big reason for that is that we really want to just make sure that we are focusing on everything that it takes to design our characters from the beginning, loosely with story in mind, so that we really focus on designing a character that in the end is very functional and not only looks great. So anyways, we're going to go ahead and get into the first part of the class, which is always going to be the lecture, which is around half hour long. I'm going to use pretty clear examples from characters in films which you may have seen. If you haven't, go ahead and check the films out. If you have, then great. One thing that we want to think about, and I'm going to start with Remy from Ratatouille, and is we're going to want to think about the storytelling that goes along with our character designs. And one of the big things that we're going to use to help push that storytelling is the introduction of a couple of props. Now, these aren't necessarily props that your character has to carry all the time, but the idea is that if we start thinking story, we start thinking who the character is, what are their goals, what are the things that they need to be accomplishing in this film that you're designing for, we have to think they're more than just a standard character that has no detail, no thought process. And as you can see, I've got Linguini here also from Ratatouille, and in a minute I'll bring up Skinner. Is I'm just sort of tracing over the main prop, which in a lot of ways is helping define him in this one simple drawing. And one thing that we're going to want to think about as well over the course of this production, so we might as well just call it a production. It is a class, but it pretty much will be treated like a production, is we're going to want to think about obviously the storytelling first, but we're going to want to think about all of our characters really being almost like mimes in that we're really going to want to push their acting super far. And as you can see, I'm tracing over the general lines of action, the posing that these characters have. And you can see that there's two totally different ways that these characters are posed, two totally different ways that they're holding their props. Now, does Remy walk around with a spoon under his arm all the time? No. Does Linguini always carry a mop? No. But the idea is that, Remy's somebody that, is kind of a go-getter, definitely wants to be a cook, has passion behind it. Linguini is kind of a clumsier kid that has just sort of stumbled into janitorial work, cleaning up the restaurant because there's really nothing else he can do, or at least he feels he can do. And that's okay. It's not like we're trying to make a huge statement about him just because he's a janitor and he's got a mop. But the main thing is that we want to think about is those are some things that are defining him already. That he's clumsy, that he's not a chef, that he cleans the place, and those are some of the things that when we're thinking about, we need to really focus on. As we're looking at with Skinner, Skinner is the shortest guy in the restaurant aside from Remy, but he's also the boss and he's got the biggest hat, as I just sort of outlined. Him standing with his arms crossed and eyebrow raised and his sort of legs out like that. He's a very sort of angry, abrasive character, as you know in the film if you've seen it. And, there's not much as far as props going on here aside from the fact that he's dressed as a chef. But the decision to make him really short, the decision to give him a huge hat that almost makes him look even smaller, it almost looks like he's kind of overcompensating for the fact that he's a short little guy. With the huge hat, it's almost there. That's where they're starting to make their statement. And as I trace over Linguini here, you'll see, some of the other statements that they're making with him. And these are the things that I want you to think about when it comes to building your character design. Because we're going to think story first, you really need to think about who your character is. And so, as we've sort of discussed, Linguini is a sort of clumsier character who's a little goofy looking. Totally different character than Skinner. So you're going to design them totally differently. Again, because you're thinking of the story, you're going to start thinking of some things that you want to do with him. As I'm suggesting here, he looks a little nervous. His eyebrows are sort of up and in. Like he's not very sure of himself. But with Skinner, he's got the eyebrows, that are looking a little aggressive, arms crossed. Linguini's arms are crossed, but he's kind of waving in a nervous way. Again, all of these decisions are really important for us to start considering when it comes to our characters. Now, when we talk about hero posing and stuff like that later on in the course, then we'll really sort of dive into that. But here, as you can see with this lineup of characters, all three are totally different. Let's ignore the fact that one's a rat. But when you're looking at their personalities, when you're looking at the way that they're designed, Remy with the sort of upbeat pose, ready. He almost looks like he's ready to cook. Linguini looks like he wasn't really ready for the picture to be taken, and Skinner looked angry for the most part. And those are decisions that we're going to be making throughout this course, and they're going to be up to you, and they're decisions that you're going to be expected to make when designing characters for a feature or a television production. Either way, when you are a professional character designer, it's not just about making a cool shape and a cool design that nobody's seen before, or focusing on silhouette in your pose and all that. I mean, that is important. It's part of the basics that we'll just sort of assume that you should know in this class. So that's why we're really going to focus on story. So as you can see, I'm starting to trace over some of the key features that help define physically Linguini. Some of them being the curly hair, the tennis shoes, the mop, the big nose, the clumsy sort of pose. All of these things come together to describe a certain type of character. And these are the things that we're going to want to focus on in this first class, is we're really going to want to focus on what are our key features that we are going to take from our character's description, and what are those things that we're going to make sure that we are including in our design. And this is going to be totally up to you based off of your character and the story you're telling with your character. Now, it's something that obviously I'll give you feedback on and make suggestions or what have you based off of your assignment. But as you can see, the things that are the strong decisions that they're making as far as going with the crazier hair and the big nose rather than, say, a really clean haircut and a sort of sharp angular face, is we're making a decision with Linguini that he's, like I said, kind of goofy. Does that mean that people with curly hair and big noses are all goofy? No. We are going to have to be careful of certain stereotypes. The best way to think about stereotypes, and I've had this question asked for me before, is really think about, stereotypes aren't necessarily a bad thing as long as you're not using them in a negative way. So if you're going to use curly hair, kind of crazy hair, big nose, skinny and gangly, that's totally fine because you're using it for a certain reason. And then the way we're using it here for Linguini is we're picking out all these features to really help make him feel a little awkward. The big nose and the big ears and the gangly legs, you can kind of think about that almost like a big puppy. When a puppy is, large enough to really sort of be walking and moving around, oftentimes their legs grow faster, their nose grows faster, and they're pretty clumsy. They're not good on their feet. So we're pretty much doing that here just with a human character. But these are the key things that I've highlighted in red and black that we want to think about with your characters when it comes to designing them from the stories that you guys are building them from. Now, do we need a story that digs into their past and what they did in kindergarten? No, we don't need anything like that for this class. Do we need something that will allow us to make some specific decisions? Of course. So if we look at Skinner, some of the things that we could describe about him is he's the head chef, so he's running the restaurant. He's a little bit power hungry. He's not very friendly. He's kind of like a little gremlin almost, in the sense that he's a shorter guy who kind of runs around angry and yelling all the time. And so those types of descriptions are going to force us to make certain design choices. And as you can see, the fact that he's the shortest guy in the restaurant, but he's got the biggest hat, it's almost like he's trying to let everybody know that, the big hat means that he's in charge, even if he's small. Or, the big hat is adding height to him, so he feels like he's a bigger guy. Those are the types of things that we want to make decisions on. Now, do we want everything to be super loud and telegraph every story point that we're making? No, we don't necessarily want to do that. But do we want to suggest that these details that we're pointing out here, the short frame, the spread legs, the crossed arms, the large hat, the angry face, those are things that we want the viewer to see. And like I said, we have to treat all of our designs in our portfolio as if they were mimes, in the sense that the body language and the visual acting and posing really needs to be strong. The visual storytelling really needs to be strong, because you don't have the character walking around on screen with production dialogue helping the design come to life. You really have to make it come to life in one image or a series of images. And that's what we're really trying to focus on in this class. So that kind of breaks down the characters in Ratatouille, and I think obviously they're great designs, they're great characters, they're very bold and specific, and we're going to kind of err on that side for our examples, which may seem fairly obvious, but it's one of those things that really helps sort of come across in a very clear and clean way. The next film that we're going to be talking about is Fight Club. Now, if any of you guys have seen this movie, then you'll know the characters I'm describing. If you haven't, go ahead and check it out, because I think you might enjoy it. It's one of my favorite movies. But the reason I'm picking it is because, and forgive me if you've seen it already, but it's basically the story of a guy, the character on the right, Edward Norton, who's basically your sort of average guy, works in an average office building, and just is fed up with life, and ends up creating this alternate character slash persona that he starts interacting with. That's the Brad Pitt character. So the character is really a figment of his imagination, but you don't necessarily know that in the movie until the end. So sorry if I just ruined it for you, but this is a class, so I got to describe the characters. Anyways, so the important thing to think about that is, if that's your story, then you're going to want to make some decisions on how these characters look. The Edward Norton character, the one I'm tracing over right now, we want to make everybody know that he's your sort of average guy, wears a suit, has a sort of clean haircut, isn't necessarily that interesting, and that's kind of what he describes himself and how he shows himself in the film. So these are the decisions that we're going to make. We're going to want to put the guy in sort of a suit, something boring, something not that interesting, somebody that is sort of feels like he's sort of plain and ordinary, and he's looking for a change. So by doing that, we're already setting up the viewer to feel a certain way when we look at this character, when we see him on screen. We also, as he starts to unravel personality-wise, things can start to change. We can start to see this suit, this haircut, this perfect shirt start to fall apart, start to become disheveled, or even possibly he loses it and has a different outfit and a different sort of way of going about dressing and looking, which he does. The character that he's imagining, that he's sort of creating, is basically the character that he wishes he could be. Somebody who's more attractive, who dresses better, who has a cooler sense of style. he doesn't come out and say this in the film. It's never necessarily said, but you get the idea that that's the story that they're going for. That's the Brad Pitt character. That he's the character that this Edward Norton character wishes that he could be. And so by simply making choices of giving him a cooler haircut, giving him a leather jacket, a popped collar, which is a little bit open on the top and the bottom, we're kind of idealizing who we wish that this character could be through the design of this character. Now, this may sound like a lecture in fashion design. That's not the idea. The idea is that when we have our characters, we have to think about everything about them. We have to think about how the story that they're in, the choices that they're making, might be affecting the way that they dress, the way that they dress throughout a film. And that's the case with this character, or these two characters, is we have two totally different concepts for the way that these actors look. We're using actors, not designs, but they are basically designs. We've got one who, like I said, is dressed a little more straightforward. We've sort of average looking. We've got one that is the idealistic character, and that the other one wishes he could be him. And we're dressing him in a leather jacket, chiseled jaw, sort of styled haircut, all of that. And those are the types of decisions that in your characters, I want you to really start thinking about. It's not that we have to finalize anything this first week, but the decisions that you're making now are going to be setting up how your characters are actually going to look throughout your production. You want to make these decisions based off of story so that when you're making these designs, they are supporting your character's story, that you can actually build off of them. And that's the thing that I think a lot of people forget about is character design isn't simply just coming up with cool shapes and cool looking characters that nobody's seen before. Yes, that is part of it, but we always have to think story first. And by thinking story first, that gives us the opportunity to really expand on a character. That allows us to not just make a superficial decision where they're going to be looking one way and doing one thing throughout the entire film or TV series. We want to give them some depth. We want to give them some range. So whether that's in an outfit, whether that's in a haircut, whether that's in you name it, those are the things that we want to think about. The next film that we're going to be talking about is Edward Scissorhands. This is a pretty bold, stylized film. In fact, it's incredibly bold and stylized. So again, I'm trying to use examples of things that, films not only that we've all possibly seen, but that are pretty bold and by definition as far as how these characters are designed. So really, this is sort of the story of a sort of, he's not a robot, but he's a human created up at a crazy factory on the top of a hill in the middle of a town of suburban people. And the whole idea is that he doesn't fit in, that he's this creation from this crazy scientist and inventor, but he is a human on some level, and he has emotion, and it's sort of his interaction with this town. So what we want to achieve out of that idea is, and what sort of Tim Burton is going for here, is a character that is drastically different by every definition as far as how he looks than the townspeople that I'm sort of tracing over here to the right. He's edgy, he's covered in leather straps, he's got scissors for hands, his hair is crazy, pale face, cuts all over his face, all of that. It's a very harsh, aggressive design, yet he's a very sweet person in the film. The townspeople are very colorful, very sort of caricatured, sort of average suburban people. Their colors are super bright, they're kind of obnoxious, the people are obnoxious, and he's really making a statement with how he wants the audience to feel the difference between Edward and the difference between the townspeople. And these are again, the types of decisions that you guys have to make. If you are, let's say you're a designer on this film, and you're having to design the townspeople, and the director says, I want these to be like caricatured suburban people that are all kind of have their own unique sort of look, but they all sort of fit in together. You have to take that and decide how far you're going to push that. How far are you going to style it? And what is that going to look like with the main character that may be designed by somebody else, but who's going for the edgy, sort of misunderstood machine slash monster look, which we have. And here you can see with Edward and the Winona Ryder character, we've got that contrast that the director's going for, as far as this sort of love story between this misfit character and this town with this girl. These are the things that we want to make story-wise. If we didn't push his design so wild and so crazy, let's say he was just a human with a little bit of a weird haircut and that was it, then you're not really going to feel that strong difference and strong contrast between him and between the townspeople or this girl. You're not going to get those funny story moments of him sort of learning what society is all about and how to interact with people with these giant sort of scissor hands and covered in straps and all of that. So again, you don't necessarily have to push every design super far, but that's going to be something else that I'm going to encourage you guys to do in this class, which is to push yourself. I don't want you to feel like the first week you've got to come up with the perfect design and it's all set in stone and done. No, I want you to push yourself. I want you to trust the process, start loose and rough, and allow yourself to make these types of decisions, because as a designer, these are the types of decisions you're going to want to make. These are the types of decisions that you're going to be expected to make, as far as showing the director a wide range of ideas, pushing the ideas really far so that it's, whether it's super obvious on screen, whether it's super stylized, we want this contrast. And as you can see what I've traced over this image here, you can see how strong that contrast is, not only just with the black and red, but with the edgy lines and the smooth lines. In a lot of ways, the interesting thing in this story is that if you flip-flop those lines, the town people are really the ones that are edgy, and he's the one that's sort of smooth and calm. Anyways, these are the types of things when we talked about shape language in the last class that you're also going to want to think about. You're going to want to think about what these differences are in design between your characters and how you can push them. Does everything have to be this bold and drastic? No. But these are things that you want to think about because it may relate to the story that you want to tell or help you push your story in a direction that is, say, more bold and stylized. So I always tell people, really think story first. You don't want to just put down a design that really has no basis when it comes to storytelling. For example, here again, if he didn't have scissors for hands, if he didn't look sort of crazy and super sort of unique, this situation where he's involved with these sort of townspeople wouldn't feel as funny, as contrasty, as interesting, as cartoony. I mean, if you look at the fence with the flowers and the way that the woman's dressed, I mean, everything, even down to the clouds in the sky, it's very much cartoony. We're very much saying this entire environment is super safe and sort of cookie cutter, and he's sort of this dangerous guy who's in it. As we look at this still from the the film, you can see, I mean, every house is painted a different color. Are they obnoxious colors? Yeah, but and it's definitely a stylized interpretation of what suburban life is. But this is the thing that you want to think about as a designer. You are creating the visual experience that the audience needs to have based off of the story. So again, if we did just a regular street with a little bit of a interesting house on the end of a hill, you're not going to get this bold, intense reaction from this idea. You're not going to get this pushed, caricatured storytelling idea with these cartoony clouds. You're going to get something that feels much more generic. And that's what I really want to encourage you guys when it comes to your storytelling. Don't be generic. Think outside of the box. Push your characters, whether it be the environments, whether it be how they look based off of their story. Do you want to make a design that's distracting? No. But you also want to find out what really is your goal here. What is the goal of the story? What do you need to push? And how do you need to push it? And in this case, this is a very stylized, bold story, and this is the way they've pushed it. And you can see it's very clear and very bold, but it's very effective. And these are the things that I want you to think about with your character designs is I want you to be bold. I want you to be effective. Remember, because these are basically mimes on pages in your portfolio, the acting, the storytelling, it needs to come through in one image. And that's what we're going to build up to. But we have to start with story first, and we have to start simple. The last film that we're going to talk about and character is Willy Wonka from Willy Wonka's and Charlie and the Chocolate Factory. I'm going to use the Gene Wilder version because this is what I grew up on and this is what I prefer. This is the Willy Wonka that I know. But anyways, what I wanted to talk a little bit about is, in this case, we're dealing with a character that is still stylized, maybe not as much, but he's an eccentric character, and he's got a couple of props and elements to his design that really help make him feel unique. And one thing that I think is really interesting about this movie is in the beginning, nobody really knows what he looks like. Nobody knows who he is. Is he a young guy? Is he an old guy? Nobody knows. He walks out with the cane and a little bit of a limp and his hat off of his head. He looks kind of like an old guy who's not doing so well anymore, maybe on his last legs. And that's the impression that they want to give you with the acting, with the performance that's going on. These are things that, if this is your character, you want to think about. He's the type of guy that is eccentric and he's unique and he's always sort of putting on a show. Realistically, he's doesn't have a limp. He doesn't use the cane because he can't walk. These people don't know that, but he's basically putting on a show. And that's something that you want to think about story-wise, because that might not be a main point of his story, that he fakes this sort of limp when really he's fine. But the main thing about his story is that he puts on a show. And so that's one way that you could portray that in a series of drawings. When we talk about model sheets and character poses, we'll get into that. But as you can see from this image, which is essentially how he is throughout the whole film, is he's, totally fine, totally able to walk. He's just sort of dressed eccentrically because his factory is totally out of this world. And he uses the cane, the top hat, the bow tie. It's all just part of his sort of unique, caricatured style. And so as you can see, that's part of the story that they're trying to tell, that this guy puts on a show, that this guy is sort of a performer, so to speak, even though he's not on stage. But he's on a stage in the sense that everybody is there to sort of see him and take a tour of his factory and hopefully take over someday. So he's got a good pose. He's got he's using the cane as sort of more of a style point. The tip top hat, it's all cool. Whereas in the beginning of the film, he sort of walks out in a totally different way and looks totally different. And this is one way that you can think as well about how just changing your character's pose, your character's attitude, can totally give an audience two different feelings. So it's very important that you're making the choices in the posing, in the design, in the wardrobe to give your audience the feeling that you want them to have. Like I said, they're making the choices to give him the purple coat, to give him the sort of funny stance, the cane, the tilted top hat to sort of make him feel eccentric and cool. They're using those same elements just in a different way to make him feel sort of unique but old, a little bit interesting. Again, they're doing two totally different things just with the way that he's standing and using the same props. So it's very important when you guys start thinking about the posing and the props that you're using that you know why you're picking those things. Because you're going to want to make sure that they support who your character is. You don't want to just give a character a top.